Before we begin, I'm thrilled to share that my new book, No More Bosses: The Journey to Sustainable Self-Employment, which is published by Penguin, is on the Amazon bestseller list. In the book, I get real about overcoming my own fears and self-doubts to pursue my entrepreneurial dreams. I share the frameworks I used, like fear setting, regret minimization framework, that helped me get comfortable with the discomfort of change. I also open up about how I discovered my unique strengths and turned them into a viable business idea. Building my personal brand, developing an effective marketing strategy, assembling a killer support network is all in there. And of course, I dive into the eternal struggle of work life harmony. As a solopreneur, it's been a constant learning process to optimize my productivity and find that elusive balance. But trust me, it's been one heck of a journey. Whether you're already self employed or just toying with the idea, I'm confident this book is going to provide you with a roadmap full of real world guidance and inspiration. You can get your copy of No More Bosses at Amazon, Kinokuniya, and all other major bookstores. And now, back to the show. Welcome back to another episode of the Adrian Tan Show. And today we are excited to welcome Dexter Zhuang, a financial innovator and globetrotter who's challenging conventional wisdom about money and career path. In 2019, he left the US to become a digital nomad, and a journey that led him to Singapore, where I am right now, and now Mexico City. Like many high achievers, Dexter climbed the corporate ladder in tech but felt something was amiss in his approach to finances. He initially pursued the popular FIRE strategy, which stands for Financial Independence Retire Early. I'll get Dexter to elaborate more on that later on, only to find it an awkward fit for his goals and values. As he continued to hit net worth milestones, he found himself questioning the purpose behind this financial pursuit. It led him on a deep, sometimes scary journey of discovery and financial exploration. He studied alternative approaches to work and money management, and we're going to dive a bit deeper onto that. End of the day, his message is clear. FIRE isn't the only path. Let's discover on this episode what other path there is. Hey Dexter, welcome to the show.
Hey, Adrian. Thanks for having me.
You're most welcome. So let's do a quick rundown on your history, your background. And I think for many of my listeners who are based in Singapore, how do you even landed up in Singapore?
Absolutely. So I'll go back to before when I was in Singapore. I grew up in the US and I grew up in a state called Michigan. Kind of looks like a glove in the Midwest. And growing up, I actually wanted to go to college to go to law school. But I went to college and discovered that was not aligned with my interests. It wasn't for me. And at the same time, I met some entrepreneurs who I found were really interesting and very passionate about their work and inspiring. And what I wanted out of my career was that I was not only, reading things or, just researching, but also taking action. And a lot of these entrepreneurs recommended for me to go to Silicon Valley. So naturally, in college, I decided to move out to San Francisco, which is where I ended up doing my internship and then starting my career. I spent about 6 years in San Francisco, ended up climbing my, tech career ladder. I worked at a startup, and I worked at Dropbox afterwards, in product management and growth. And after that 6 years, I felt like I had achieved a lot of my career goals that I wanted out of at least my 20s in Silicon Valley. But there was something that was left unchecked, and that was this aspiration to go and see what it was like to work or live in other parts of the world. And so I left San Francisco in 2019. I did this travel sabbatical. I spent some time in Southeast Asia, where I spent some time in Singapore, went to Europe, South America. I ended up really loving Southeast Asia. So I came back in 2020. I had also, met my partner in Singapore. She's not Singaporean, she's Australian, but we decided together to go back to Singapore for work. So that's how I got to Singapore, is through this kind of journey of exploration. And what I liked about Singapore was that it was a hub of Southeast Asia. And so there was a lot of activity economically. You know, in tech, you saw a bunch of startup activity, especially in the late 2010s. Uh, there was a lot of new companies being formed. That was exciting to me. So I wanted to be a part of that. And that's why I ended up joining a growth stage startup that ended up becoming a fintech unicorn in the region. After about 3 years in Singapore, then my wife and I, we also have some other life goals, which led us to leaving Singapore at least temporarily and moving to Mexico City, where we are today, staying and then traveling around a little bit around the Latin America region.
Nice. And I'm curious, why Mexico City? Because you mentioned you really love Southeast Asia and all. I would imagine maybe around the place, even Australia, where your partner is. Is there a specific reason why you chose Mexico City?
Yes. So my partner and I, we really value curiosity. That's one of our biggest values. One of the things that we started doing in 2019 that we haven't been able to finish so far is learning Spanish and gaining some level of fluency in Spanish. So we wanted to go somewhere where we could be more immersive and do more immersive learning. And that has been really helpful.
So really jump into the deep end of the pool from the get-go.
Yes, yeah, that was our goal.
So let's touch on the financial perspective that you had. Working overseas, working abroad in different companies, that's one thing. When did this financial aspect or change of financial perspective come into play?
Definitely. Like you said in the introduction, when I was in San Francisco, all I had really heard about at that point were kind of two or three paths. One path was you work until you're 65 and then you retire at 65 because you have enough saved after working that corporate job and climbing the career ladder. The second option was you do this early retirement kind of path, which is you save a very high percentage of your income, say like 50% of your income or even more in your 20s and your 30s. And by the time you're in your 40s, then with a bit of investment income growth and that savings, you can do early retirement. So that was path two. I heard path three was something that was a bit more plausible in a place like Silicon Valley, where there were a lot of startups. So another path that was available was okay, in your career, you might work at let's say like five different startups and you can roll the dice and there's a startup lottery and maybe one's going to hit it really big and IPO and then you're going to be able to retire based off those proceeds. So those were three different pathways that I saw in San Francisco. I chose this early retirement path of okay, maybe I can just save a lot, a high percentage of my income and continue to increase my income through salary growth, through negotiation, through side hustles. And what I discovered was that that wasn't something sustainable for me, at least. I think for some people, it's definitely aligns with what they're interested in doing. I think there's a lot of great kind of features of Fire. I think it really teaches people how to save and how to be more aware of their money and how to develop long-term goals for like what do they need in order to be early retired? What does that even mean? Right? I think Fire does a great job of asking those kind of questions, like understanding your monthly expenses and what's your run rate. But for me, I discovered I actually like work, and so that was fundamentally just not a great fit in terms of how I saw, my rest of 30s or 40s or 50s, like what I actually wanted to do and spend with my time. And because of that, it also opened up some other options, like once I could put work into consideration.
What's the one part about the traditional fire path that just doesn't click with you?
Sure. So one part about the early retirement piece of fire, I think, and this isn't everyone in fire believes this, but I think because the practice of early retirement means you're saving such a high percentage of your income in your 20s and 30s, it really like boils down to this value of frugality. So it really emphasizes frugality. It really
Mhm.
emphasizes, doing less, not more, in terms of spending, in terms of your activities. And for me, I see I'm in my 30s now, but I'm very grateful I spent, money on travel, adventures, or spend money on certain activities that I probably wouldn't have if I was solely focused on saving.
Mm. Okay. So it's really trying to strike a balance in trying to, I guess, enjoy the current moment, while at the same time not exactly moving away and kick fire away, but to try to find a balance in between, which is, I guess, in one of your article you mentioned semi-retirement.
Yes,
What is your personal definition of semi-retirement? For some people, it's working a part-time job. For some people, it could be just maybe an adjunct lecturer at the school nearby. What does it mean to you? What does it mean for many people out there?
that's a great question. Semi-retirement, to me, is the act of at least for certain people, and I'm talking very specifically about people who are high performers, who are ambitious, who are relatively, high agency. And the switch they're trying to make is to go from living to work to working to live, right? And so the way I'm defining semi retirement aligns with that, which is you're going from a high stress, high paying job, and you are quote unquote retiring from that, and then you are changing to another, whether it's part-time work or fractional work, or a full-time job but slightly lower pay maybe, and you enjoy more, that brings you more joy. That to me is semi-retirement. And then you make up the difference through your investment portfolio and whatever passive income that you have built over time through those investments. That can cover the difference. So there is some math there, but you can
Hmm.
calculate that out, and there is math that supports this. Assuming, of course, like your investments are going to grow at a certain rate, then having income continuing to come in, just at a slightly, lower income level, still helps you
Mm.
achieve the fire number that you had set out to achieve. It just might take longer to achieve that fire number. So maybe you are delaying that by like 5 years or 10 years. But what you're pulling forward is the time that you're spending on work that you enjoy. And so that's the trade off. There's no perfect solution, of course,
Hmm.
with managing money, that balance between money and, time and work and enjoyment. But that's the trade off that you're making.
Mm. Right. And on that note, the savings part is clear cut. You just save more money or save less money, depending on how much you want to save. The semi-retirement aspect also means that you do need some kind of support, uh, work support in the future for people who may currently be, okay, take myself for example. I'm 45 right now. If I want to aim towards semi-retirement, it means when I'm in my 50s or maybe 60s, I do have to get some kind of work as a means to continue to support myself. How
Yes.
do I look at what I should aim towards? Because I can't imagine whatever I'm doing to just, okay, I'm not going to spend 40 hours right now, just want to spend 20 hours. Employers may not even give a shit. So So, what would you advise for someone like me, where I'm 45, to start working at on to start looking at to aim towards I guess a decent income to support your semi-retirement 10, 20 years down the road?
That's a great topic. And I think here I want to highlight a few examples of people actually doing this. So there's a shift in what kind of work looks like in terms of jobs. We talked about part-time work. We talked about fractional portfolio careers is another kind of path some people are taking. So um, I recently interviewed Eric Sims. He was a managing director at UBS, and he left, that high paying and probably very time consuming job and is now more full time in speaking. He wrote a book and he's been marketing that. He's doing coaching. And so that's a much different set of activities that he's doing for his work. But I can see that he's enjoying that a lot and that he's getting a lot out of, that kind of activity. And it may he's never obviously shared the actual income differences, but I would imagine the UBS role is very high paying, and maybe at least when he started out doing what he is doing today, it probably didn't bring in that much, at least at the start. Maybe now, things are different. So that's one example. Another example is more on the fractional work side. So someone else in Singapore who I interviewed, Mark Mullenix, he was, very experienced in loyalty, in travel and in that sector. He has experience at American Express, and in terms of the card loyalty industry, he has a lot of expertise. And so when he left his last full time role, then he decided to go more into a fractional kind of uh, direction. And what fractional means is that he, as a pretty senior kind of person, he has, executive experience. He realized that startups in Singapore and Southeast Asia, they wanted to tap his level of expertise, but then they just didn't have enough funds to bring in someone full time. And they didn't even need someone to come in as like a chief executive for loyalty, but they wanted that expertise at a fractional kind of time commitment. And that's what he was able to do. He was able to connect with startups who are interested in that and start working with them. And so now he has several clients where he's working with these startup clients as their, strategy kind of partner, expert on loyalty. And so that's another example of someone who has made that transition, in a more senior kind of level of their career.
On Eric Sim, whom I also follow quite closely, I would imagine he didn't transition from MD at UBS straight away to become a public speaker, author, etc. He probably has done it or try to practice his craft even while he was with UBS, which is what we would define as side hustles. And we mentioned about side hustles earlier on. I like to touch a bit on that. But I also want to understand your perspective of what some people are saying about side hustles. Professor Scott Galloway, he personally is very critical of side hustles, arguing that they can be a distraction from building true wealth. What's your personal take on this? Because I would imagine for anyone to build up a craft that is meant to support a semi-retirement or to go into a portfolio career, you have to start somewhere. You do not want to just, okay, I'm gonna quit, I'm gonna just go all in. It just doesn't seem right and doesn't seem safe. How would you respond to those perspectives, especially people who are skeptical of the value of side hustles?
Yeah, I'm with you on that note of uh, Eric Sims probably didn't just immediately cut the rope and say, okay, I don't need the lifeline anymore. I'm just gonna, leave UPS and just start fresh. Some people do that, but I don't recommend that for most people. I think it's often, a shock to your system, and not everyone really survives that shock or adapts to it very well. So I would say, in response to Scott Galloway's comment, which I believe was that your side hustle is like a distraction from your main hustle, something along those lines. My view on this is actually side hustles are valuable for your career development. And so not only in terms of, your portfolio career that you want to develop so that you can carve your independent kind of career path in the future, but also, if your early career or even mid career, then side hustles are a fantastic way to build skill sets and to demonstrate your differentiation in the market, when you're applying for jobs even. So an example of this is when I was a hiring manager in, a growth stage kind of startup context. The last company I worked for in Singapore was, I was there from the Series A to the Series D. And what I really, valued was when someone had done side projects, side hustles on and put that on their resume, because I could ask them a lot of questions about that and have a pretty deep understanding of how they approached more entrepreneurial kind of skills. Like, I could ask questions like, were they resourceful? Were they thoughtful? How much did they take action? You know, um, I could see, how creative they were. So those were different kind of skills that I could evaluate because they had done the side hustle. And I found that especially valuable for corporate candidates who are trying to transition into startups. So, for example, someone who maybe worked in finance for a few years, went to their MBA, and then graduated their MBA. Now they're like, hey, I'm interested in this startup thing. It seems kind of sexy now. Well, at that point it was. I don't know about now in this economic climate. But then I had, a few MBA candidates' resumes that I was looking at, and a lot of them look kind of similar, to be honest. So how do I differentiate? Well, the side hustles were a fantastic way to differentiate. So that's the skill set part, and how it appeals to employers. The second thing I would say is that the side hustles also help build network. So one thing that I started was career coaching, and I started doing that in the tech industry 4 or 5 years ago. And what I noticed was that it helped me connect with other coaches in the industry who were doing interesting things. And I was able to connect with more peers in other companies as well as mentors in the industry. And so that opened up more doors to more opportunities later on. So that's network piece. And the last thing I'll mention is, of course, there's a different skill set when you're building something of your own. That's the entrepreneurial kind of skill set. And if eventually what you aspire to do is a semi-retirement path and you want to build a portfolio career like Eric Sims, or you want to do fractional work like Mark, then the time to start is now, and you can build that skill set through those side hustles. And it'll probably take several iterations before you feel more confident in your abilities. So building that confidence is that last piece.
Yeah, I like the part where you mentioned to surface and showcase your side hustles to potential employers or your employers as a means of differentiation. But having said that, I think before our call, you also mentioned there are some companies that frown upon side hustles. Spotify, if I'm not wrong, is one of them. So do your own research before you showcase your side hustles to your boss. I personally had been on the receiving end on something like that. I was interviewing for a job, and it wasn't something deliberate. The interviewer happened to know that I'm an influencer in the HR space. I was, smiling inside, like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We are quite concerned about your influencer status. So basically, he sees from a negative standpoint, which I can understand, because if I talk shit online, I say the wrong thing, the company is going to be affected. I completely understand that, which is, I guess, why I decided to remain unemployable and independent. But that's another story for another day. As someone who has lived and worked in different countries, so many different countries, I like to understand that concept of whether it's a traditional FIRE, semi-retirement, does it differ from country to country? I understand most of your premise right now perhaps is very much from a North America lens, given that you have stayed in Asia before, Singapore for some time. Would there be some differentiation that people in this part of the world should take note of?
Definitely, definitely. I think there's, a large kind of difference between North America or the US, like we can talk about US specifically, and Singapore. And one key difference I think is culture. So culture, uh, in terms of how do people talk about money is quite different. So in the US, money has a love-hate kind of relationship, right? Like people hate talking about money because it makes them feel bad about themselves, but they also love talking about the things that they can get with money and like, all the luxuries or all the entertainment, right? So there's that kind of love-hate duality in US culture versus in Singapore, I think there's a little bit of that, but it feels a little bit more subdued maybe. I think there's um, definitely also a culture of hustle. You can correct me if I'm wrong. This is my observation from working in Singapore for a few years, but I get the sense of money is always top of mind, and people generally have a uh, relatively more like kind of conservative approach to money. Just really broad strokes based on my observations of Singaporeans that I meet versus Americans that I know in the U.S. There's a bit more like risk seeking behavior in the U.S. When Americans think about how they want to spend money or what they want to invest, with their money. I think there's a bit more of a bias towards okay, I can take more risks. Uh, and there's a certain kind of structures that also enable those behaviors. So, for example, in the U.S., there's a big emphasis on real estate. I mean, Singaporeans love their real estate as well, for sure. And there's a lot of discussion around real estate. But in the US, there's the 30-year fixed year mortgage as a product. And that really changed the landscape for, people who wanted to start investing in property or buying property. And you can see like over the past few decades, people really got excited about property in the US. And there's been a wave of people, especially, baby boomers who bought a lot of property over time because of the availability of lending, right? Whereas in Singapore, there's a different dynamic because yes, there's loans and such, but there's just like more limited space. There's more government regulation, and so real estate isn't uh, quite as big. I feel like as like a high risk, like let's go, take some big bets, kind of lever. So those are some differences that I notice in terms
Mm.
of people's views on money and investing.
I think you're quite spot on the risk adverse aspect because, as the saying goes, pain drives action. And in Singapore, we don't really experience pain. It's very comfortable, it's extremely safe. And there was an article about a year ago talking about why there are not many Singaporeans becoming global CEO because, well, we are just so comfortable. So that's on the work part. But
Mm.
I think overall, it does permeate across many different aspects. There would be conversation about money, especially during Chinese New Year when you have the more nosy relatives asking you how much are you making, trying to compare that with your cousins, the typical Asian stuff, which of course then that would be very painful for people. And talking about pain, I do understand you've built a following of over 6,000 subscribers with your Money Abroad platform. What are some of the common questions or pain points you often hear from different people seeking your advice, who are exploring your alternatives to the standard FIRE approach?
Definitely. So when I first started Money Abroad, it was a newsletter that was focused on money for expats. And so naturally, the type of problems that I kind of talked about and also attracted people interested in were the problems of, okay, if you are someone who moves from country to country, and maybe you have a partner, from another country, then how do you manage your finances? And how do you invest? And how do you also think about things like your job search and your salary negotiation and uh, those kind of things? And over time, as I grew the newsletter readership, what I discovered was that there's also a common set of problems, which is related to what we had talked about earlier of people feeling like, okay, the default paths of fire or work until 65 and retire are not for me, but I don't know what else there is, and I don't know how to pursue those things. Like, how do I go and actually execute those things, right? And I realized that that was another big problem that people really faced, and that's what I've been trying to share more of is more examples and case studies, some from my life and my finances, some from my peers, like I mentioned earlier, and trying to then carve out like, oh, here are some of the options that you have, and then here is what you would do if you actually wanted to go and pursue those options.
I'll share the link to your newsletter in the show notes so people can check it out and do have a look. There are many amazing articles. I personally really enjoyed the one about the ultimate guide to semi-retirement. That really changed my perspective on many things. Now, although you have started this journey, I wouldn't say very long ago, but you definitely have gone into the deep end of the pool. And looking at how things has transformed over the past few years, things like fractional work, AI being a huge a game changer altogether, it has really shaped the future of financial independence. How do you foresee all these trends affecting how people build their wealth and also achieve their life goals going forward?
Definitely, yeah. Looking ahead, we talked about default paths today and how there's this emergence of options in the future, and part of what's driving that emergence, of course, is technology and AI, as well as cultural shifts like remote work after COVID, is uh, for better for worse here to stay and probably going to continue to increase because people got a taste of that and now they can't go back. Part-time work is also becoming more of a trend, at least in the US. Having multiple jobs is becoming more of a trend as well. Over 50% of Americans are expected to have uh, basically, a freelancing kind of gig by 2027, I think, according to a Statista as a resource. So, one thing that I want to highlight is looking ahead with AI becoming so powerful as a technology, especially to you know um, increase leverage for workers who are ambitious, who are high performing, who are wanting to work to live and kind of control their time a bit more. AI and these new technologies and the cultural changes really converge on giving those people a lot more uh, potential impact and leverage, I think, in the future. So, an example of this is obviously with AI tools, you're able to increase your productivity, your output, depending upon what you're doing. So, in my case, you know, AI is helping me write faster, right? It can help me with doing some research. It can help me with preparing the outlines. And because of that, I mean, it's not replacing, my work entirely, but it's saving me time. And because of that, it's increasing my leverage. And previously in the tech industry, everyone always talked about the rise of the 10x engineer. And 10x engineer meant, this engineer is 10x more productive than the other engineers, right? And in the future, because AI is a set of technologies that can be used by non-engineers, like non-technical people, I think what you're going to be seeing is the rise of the 10x non-technical worker. And that means this pattern is actually going to extend to non-technical functions in companies. But that also means it's going to extend to people pursuing a portfolio career who want to carve out their independent kind of work portfolio. These technologies are going to help them create more leverage.
I can't argue enough for people to really explore using AI tools more as a way to boost their productivity or to just do more with less time. For anyone who follow my podcast for the longest time, just go back to my episode 1. Look at the show notes. It sucks. But look at my more recent show notes. Those are all created by AI. You just dump in the file, transcript everything. The show notes will be generated because I do not want to spend like 3 hours crafting a show notes. It's just not a good use of my time. But AI could do it in seconds. So it'd be silly and really foolish to skip that and claim or insist that you want to do the artisanal approach. Yes, it's fine, but your show note is not going to be your art piece. So maybe there is a better use of your time instead. Now, you mentioned you were a career coach. Perhaps are you still a career coach right now?
No, I'm not a career coach at the moment. I'm doing, more B2B kind of consulting work.
Okay, but since you were one before, I can't let you go without asking you this question. Looking at how things have transformed so far, if you have a kid right now, what kind of career advice would you give your kid? I'm not going to the extent of how our Asian parents would be like, you got to be an engineer, you got to be a lawyer, but it's more so to, I guess, prep him or her to be, I guess, in a better sense of by virtue of them showing up, they already win half the battle. So, what kind of career advice or tips would you share with your kid?
Oh, that's such a good question. Uh, Definitely, you don't have to be a lawyer, don't have to be a doctor or an engineer. I still feel trauma. Uh, my mom still, sometimes calls me and asks, do I want to go back into, do I want to go do consulting or finance or something? Um, I would tell them that what they uh, what they are learning as they're starting their career is really what they're good at. And one of the challenges that I faced in my 20s was just spending a lot of time kind of like overthinking, like what am I actually good at? You know,
Mm,
doing a lot of reflection about it, kind of thinking about it, uh, feeling like I didn't have it quite nailed down what I was good at. And because of that, I took a lot of time to then actually take that and go, start projects based on it or, negotiate my salary based on that or go decide, to switch jobs based on that. I think it's super important to understand, your superpowers, your strengths. So what I would tell my kid is like, yes, you can go pursue, what you're interested in doing, but everything has trade-offs. So if you want to go be a
mm,
musician, then for sure, you can go and try that, but then, you know, I'm not going to pay for, that career path. That's on you to pay for it, right? So you understand that trade-off. And the sooner you understand the strengths that you have, the more I think your path just starts becoming more clear for you and you start understanding like which kind of roles are you really going to shine in, what kind of skills you're going to enjoy focusing on. It goes back to what Cal Newport said in his book, So Good They Can't Ignore You. I really believe in that, where once you get so good at something, then you start enjoying doing it as well, and it starts becoming your quote unquote passion, right? So I would tell my future kids, I don't have kids now, but I would tell my future kids something along those lines.
In my recent book that I published, which is called No More Bosses, it's a self-employment guide. I mentioned superpower as well. And personally, for me, I had trouble trying to identify what the superpower is, but I also realized over time, people would keep saying the same thing to you over and over again. So I've been observing there are many people who said, hey, they think that marketing is my superpower. And I just lean into it, even though I'm someone who can't take compliments well for some reason. But I started to believe them more than I believe myself. So why don't I just give it a try? What's the worst that can happen? And I also remember one of my old manager, ex-manager telling me, hey, you seem to have quite a decent voice. If you decide to quit your job, maybe you can consider becoming a DJ. I basically wave it away. But when podcast was much easier to be done, I decided, okay, I hate my voice, but let me trust my former manager and see where it goes. And I guess it went quite well. So with that, I think we end on a great note. Look for your superpower, and for people who wants to learn more, already know your superpower and is aiming to turn your superpower into something to support your retirement or semi-retirement, do check out Dexter's newsletter, Money Abroad, which I'm going to put into the show notes, done up by AI. And with that, thank you so
Amazing.
much for coming onto the show, Dexter.
Thanks so much for having me, Adrian. It's been a lovely conversation. Really enjoyed chatting with you from everything on AI to semi-retirement.